Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar series organized by the MEP Interest Group on antimicrobial resistance. My name is Jean Stenwick. I'm with the organization Healthcare Within Europe, and I will be the co-chair of this meeting together with my colleague Zoltan, who works with the European Public Health Alliance, or EPHA. Together, Healthcare Within Europe and the European Public Health Alliance are co-hosting the Secretariat of the MEP Interest Group on antimicrobial resistance with the support of the AMR Stakeholder Network, the largest civil society-led network of AMR stakeholders in Europe. The MEP Interest Group on AMR, launched in February 2020, is the only AMR dedicated group in the European Parliament. It brings together 17 MEPs from across the political spectrum who are working together to make Europe a global leader in the fight against AMR. You can follow the development of this group on its website and on Twitter with the hashtag MEPvsAMR.
Thank you, Gianni, for those intro. And indeed, in the run-up to the European Antibiotic Awareness Day tomorrow, the MEP Interest Group has been organizing a series of 3 webinars to raise awareness of the need for action and find evidence-informed policy solutions to this urgent threat to human and animal and environmental health. Following the last week's webinar hosted by Nicolae Ștefănută, MEP, Vice Chair of the MEP Interest Group, which examined the environmental dimension of AMR, and yesterday's discussion held under the auspices of the chair of the group, MEP Sarah Wiener, which looked at the agricultural aspect. The current event today is hosted by MEP Timo Volken, Vice Chair of the MEP Interest Group. Today, we will have a discussion to how to fix the antibiotic innovation pipeline. The discussion will be looking for answers for the following questions. How can the development of the new needs-driven models to finance and stimulate antibiotic research and development be supported? How can the EU promote research and development models that ensure responsible use of and equitable and affordable access to antibiotics? How can the pharmaceutical strategy be a game changer and contribute fixing the antibiotic innovation pipeline? And finally, how can the EU raise more awareness on AMR, and how can we prevent the misuse and overuse of antibiotics on the ground? So now I am delighted to give the floor to MEP Timo Volken, who will give the welcome remarks and introduce our speakers. MEP Volken, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I start right away with my few opening words. So the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded the world of the serious threat that emerging infectious diseases can pose to human health and our economies. It has highlighted the need for increased monitoring and surveillance tools, improved infection prevention and control practices, access to rapid diagnostic tests, and developing effective and affordable medicines and vaccines. The deficiencies revealed, however, have long been recognized in the fight against antimicrobial resistances. Antibiotics are vital medicines in the treatment of bacterial infections. Without them, common infections that we can treat today would become fatal tomorrow. Treatments such as chemotherapy, diabetes management, major surgery, or organ transplantation would put patients at a very high risk. But the effectiveness of antibiotics is under threat, as we all know, by the development and spread of drug-resistant bacteria, and antimicrobial resistances, or AMR, is now a key cross-border health threat for Europe and the world. In Europe only, AMR causes the annual death of 33,000 people and costs 1.5 billion euros in terms of healthcare costs and productivity losses. The current antibiotic innovation pipeline is, as we know, broken. The last antibiotic class that was successfully introduced as a treatment was discovered back in 1987. For your information, I was 2 years old then. Meanwhile, we assist we assist in an increase in global antibiotic consumption that is not always justified, as it is estimated that up to 50% of all antimicrobials consumed in human health care may be inappropriate. However, new antibiotics are often associated with lack of profitability for pharmaceutical companies, as their development is costly and their lifespan on market is short due to the resistance development. Therefore, there is a need to support needs-driven models to finance and stimulate antibiotic research and development. We should, for instance, rethink the economic model so that revenues are not dependent on the volume of sales as a means to ensure both affordability and rational use for conservation of effective antibiotics. And in this context, the European Commission will next week adopt a new pharmaceutical strategy whose aim is to improve patients' access to safe and affordable medicines and to support the industry in promoting innovation and research to fulfill patients' needs. In its roadmap, the Commission acknowledged science limitations and the lack of interest from industry to invest in the development of novel antibiotics, antimicrobials. It also stated that the strategy would aim at supporting stakeholders to address market failure and at facilitating the need-driven development of new products. Last month, a group of 30 MEPs sent a letter to the Commission to stress the need for their strategy to address AMR. In our letter, we recommend addressing the particular market failure in antibiotic research and innovation and increasing transparency in the research and innovation aspects. Another interesting development was the recent launch of the AMR Action Fund by pharmaceutical industry. It aims to bring 2 to 4 new antibiotics by 2030 by investing more than $1 billion. We will talk more about this fund and the crucial need for public investment across the entire chain to address the market failures in antibiotic research and innovation. And now I'm delighted to welcome 4 speakers who will speak about these aspects in greater detail. Our first speaker is Helle Agard. She is Deputy Director at REACT Europe and an independent network advocating for global engagement on antibiotic resistance, where she provides analysis and advocacy input for global, regional, and national policy debates on antibiotic resistance. Our second speaker is Mr. Willo Bruck. He is the Senior Vice President of External Affairs at the Global Alliance for TB Drug Development, a non-profit organization dedicated to the discovery, development, and delivery of better, faster-acting, and affordable drugs that are available to those who need them. And our third speaker is Mark Gitzinger. And Mark is the Vice President of the BEAM Alliance, a European association representing over 60 European and international small and medium enterprises activity in antimicrobial research and development. And he has over 10 years of experience in the biotech industry. And our fourth speaker is Tim Jinks. Tim is the head of drug resistance infections program at the Wellcome Trust research charity committed to speeding up development and delivery of new and improved antibiotic treatments and diagnostics. It notably supports the Global Antibiotic Research and Development Partnership. And now I can hand over back to our moderators.
Thank you very much, MEP Falcon. I think your welcome remarks gave an insightful overview of the topic and the discussion, but also of the political context around it. And we see that this issue is particularly timely as you said, the European Commission is planning to launch its pharmaceutical strategy in a few days. I'm now turning to our 4 speakers. We have been invited to give short introductory remarks, and these will be followed by an interactive discussion during which we will take questions from the audience. So we want this session to be as interactive as possible. This is your opportunity to engage with our host and speakers. So please ask questions in the chat box. We will get back to them later on. Please also engage on Twitter with the hashtag of the MEP Interest Group on AMR, MEPvsAMR. And finally, we'd like to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and that the recording will be sent to you by email and published on the website of the MEP Interest Group in the next few days. I'd like to give the floor first to Tim from the Wellcome Trust. Tim, you are leading the Trust Drug-Resistant Infections Program. Could you outline for us the work done by the Wellcome Trust to support antibiotic research and innovation, and share your thoughts on what could be done at the EU level to fix the antibiotic innovation pipeline? I would invite you to unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thanks very much for those superb introductory words from MEP Falcon. Really, we should replay that summary time and time again, because it does cover the key issues that surround the challenges that we have in regards to antimicrobial resistance and the problem we're trying to solve, which is to prevent drug-resistant infections from impacting people's health and their lives. So Wellcome Trust is a research charity that works globally to support science to solve the urgent health challenges facing everyone. Antimicrobial resistance is one of those key challenges. And of course, as has already been stated, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought into very sharp focus just exactly what can happen with infectious diseases and how infectious diseases, while having devastating local impacts, are actually international problems and require international collaboration, coordination, and long-term efforts to solve these difficult issues. Wellcome Trust has been focused on antimicrobial resistance as an issue for a number of years. We've supported the basic research looking at the problem, as well as the basic research to help identify new targets for developing therapeutics or other forms of interventions to address this. More recently, we launched a priority program to increase our efforts and focus to try and have significant change against this problem. As it already has been stated, we were an early funder in the GARD-P program. Alongside that, we are a co-funder in the CARB-X initiative, the product accelerator, which supports the early stage R&D for antibiotics and also diagnostics, vaccines, and other preventative measures. The work that's undertaken by CARB-X and GARD-P are incredibly important as we look at this area of antibiotics itself and the antibiotic pipeline. I don't think we can say enough that the antibiotics pipeline itself is in crisis. This is a long-standing problem which has gotten worse and worse and worse. And while we have seen some progress with the reignition of efforts in the early stage R&D space, we still do not see that there is a sustainable pipeline so that innovative products can enter into routine use. And that's the important thing here. We need to think about, well, what's the end goal? And the end goal is to have safe and effective antibiotics available to use whenever necessary and only when necessary. So what more needs to happen in this space? Of course, there needs to be continued efforts to support the basic science research that underpins that pipeline, but the translation of that research into products needs to be increased. And we need to look at the downstream barriers. And this is the area where there is the biggest gap and one that needs urgent focus. It's that broken marketplace. And from a European perspective, what we see is the fragmentation of that market further complicates the picture. So what can happen at a European level to try and simplify things? Well, we certainly believe that there should be additional support in the development stage of R&D to help bring forward products to registration so that they can enter into the marketplace. But there needs to be serious and considerable efforts looking at the financial barriers and the lack of financial incentives for antibiotics to enter in the marketplace and stay in the marketplace. Now, last area that is extremely important is looking at stewardship and access and the availability. And these are things that are not simply ones that should be limited to Europe, but are actually global. Stewardship is necessary to protect the valuable resources that antimicrobials are, so that they are as effective for as long as possible and can support the availability. But access is a critical issue. There's insufficient access throughout the world to innovative products. And we need to incorporate the thinking about how to achieve access during the R&D stages and not to treat that as an afterthought. And it certainly would be good to see that there was a European position taken on how we can increase access and European efforts done to increase access across Europe and throughout the world. And lastly, there are some really interesting developments that we can see. There's an opportunity for Europe to launch an advanced R&D initiative to help bring forward products to make them available, particularly in emergency situations. And that's something that we would strongly advocate to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that insightful intervention. And I am sure the presented welcome trust perspective, and especially on your focus on how to ensure and increase access in antibiotic research and innovation, will give good food for thought for the upcoming discussion. I would like just to take this opportunity to remind participants that if you have questions to Tim, you can table them now or anytime using the chat box function. We will come back then at later on in the discussion phase. And likewise, if you would like to tweet about the event, remember using the event hashtag MEPvsAMR. With that note, it is now my pleasure to hand over to Helle Ågard, Deputy Director at REACT Europe, who will speak from a civil society perspective on the gaps and needs in the area of new antibiotic developments. Helle, the floor is yours to share your presentation.
Okay, is my presentation visible to everyone?
Yes, it's working.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you for so much for inviting REACT to participate in this panel today. Just a quick word about REACT. It's already been some introduction, so I won't dwell on this. As said, we're an international independent network that focuses on antibiotic resistance and addressing the global crisis in antibiotic R&D and formulating sustainable solutions has really been a core issue for REACT throughout our 15 years of experience and existence. And let's see, how do I go to the next slide? Oh, sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. So this is the background for why we have this meeting today. I won't go much into this either, as there's already been some excellent points made on this, and MEP Vulcan really covered this very well in his introduction. What I will say is that what I'll present today are some recommendations from a forthcoming report on addressing the crisis in antibiotic R&D that REACT will be launching early next year. And I want to make a point that we really believe, much in line with what Tim has already outlined, that this discussion goes far beyond just putting obligations on R&D funding or creating big financial incentives and only looking at sort of the economic problem of this. Antibiotic resistance and the problem of of antibiotic R&D is a systemic issue, and it really must be addressed as such. And so REACT therefore advocates for an end-to-end approach, where the whole chain of actors from early discovery to patient use are linked, and where the interventions are designed to achieve these predetermined goals that I've listed here in this slide. And so we want to see that the right antibiotic is affordable and accessible for everyone in need in all countries, in particular low and middle income countries. We want to see that antibiotics are managed to preserve their therapeutic effectiveness and minimizing the development and spread of resistance. And we want to see antibiotic production and supply being robust, reliable, and environmentally sound. And all of this put together should really achieve sustainable access to effective antibiotics for all. So in order to achieve this, we believe that there are 5 key challenges that must be addressed. We need to get R&D prioritization right. Currently, research priorities still skew towards what's needed in the most profitable markets. We need to overcome major scientific challenges that still persist. It's not just economic issues hampering R&D. Basic scientific challenges remain unsolved. We need to find new ways to finance late-stage R&D to avoid a business model that is dependent on high prices and large sales volumes. That goes against access, affordable access, and stewardship. We need to ensure sustainable production. We need to ensure good quality antibiotics, improve our ways of procuring antibiotics, and we need to ensure that there's widespread registration of these new antibiotics once they're being put on the market. And finally, and I think this is perhaps the core point I want to make today, is that we really need to focus a lot more on how we are planning to introduce these new antibiotics responsibly into weak health systems where they're really urgently needed. So what can the EU do better in terms of what it's already doing? And so we think that the research programs under the EU should really narrowly focus on the WHO's prioritization guidance. That includes the priority pathogens list and includes the target product profiles that the WHO is in the process of developing at the moment. We would like to see the EU increase early stage funding for discovery and research to overcome those scientific challenges that still persist, and require that such data, that the more data sharing and collaborative approaches through its funding. And then finally, we want to see more sustainability in the way that the EU goes about this. We think that the EU should improve existing collaborative structures like the IMI funded mechanism enable, instead of closing it down, which is currently what is planned for it once funding runs out. And so if we're looking at the new pharmaceutical strategy and what Tim hinted to with the European BARDA, or an R&D authority for emergency preparedness and response, what can be done there? Well, there's a lot that can be done, and we will provide much more detail and recommendations once we launch our report. But 3 points to highlight. I think the European Commission should really be exploring on how they can reduce R&D costs. This can be done through a number of different measures. Some of them are listed here. We want to see, aside from what's been established with the AMR Action Fund that is funded by industry, that there's a public pathway established of funding for clinical development, and that pathway really applies full delinkage. We want to see that procurement and production is also addressed, and that could include EU-level pool procurement. It could also include non-profit or public production of essential drugs, which is, for example, something we've seen the US actually turn to. And all of these put together on an end-to-end basis would really take us quite a long way. But antibiotic resistance is a global problem, and as such also requires global solutions at the end of the day. So my final slide here, what can the EU do in terms of investing in global governance? And I think this is an important point to end on. And there's already a mandate that was actually given with this new commission coming in to the health commissioner to pursue a global agreement on use of and access to antimicrobials. We think that that work should really be revived and should build on the emerging structures that are slowly coming together at global level now to establish global governance for AMR. And sort of a starting point for doing that would be for the European Commission and the EU as a whole to develop what we think would be a develop and promote a fair and sound end-to-end strategy that really looks at all these different challenges that needs to be solved. And it needs to be inclusive enough to be funded, supported, and coordinated by all countries. And it needs to be done in a forum where that's possible. And it's particularly important to include low and middle income countries in this process. And finally, we want to see the EU being a much more active actor in supporting health system strengthening, in particular in low middle income countries, as the health systems in these countries are ultimately those that will also have to deal with new drugs coming in that we don't want to see resistance develop too fast. And so ultimately, we do have a pretty good idea of what we need to do globally in order to address antibiotic resistance. So the question is really making it a political priority. And I think to that, I would just end up saying that we either decide to pay now and really invest in these different challenges that needs to be solved, or we will have to pay much more later in terms of spending, economic losses, and loss of human life. So I'll end on that and hand it over to others on the call.
Thank you very much, Helle. We look forward to reading your future work on this issue, and we took note that the report would be published earlier next year. If you have any questions for Helle, please write them down in the chat. We'll get back to her later on. And I'm now turning to our next speaker, with Willow from the TB Alliance. Willow, first of all, I understand that you are calling from a different time zone from the other side of the globe. So many thanks for making you available for this important discussion today. As you are with the TB Alliance, I'm wondering, why is it so crucial to develop new antibiotic drugs to fight tuberculosis in particular? And what is your unique non-for-profit perspective to antibiotic development? So I would invite you to mute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Yves. And yes, I'm on the US East Coast, as also not able to travel like everyone else and not be in Brussels, which is a bit early here, but that's fine because of this important discussion we had today. And I already want to thank MEP Vulcan, Tim, and Helle for their introductory remarks. I think there's a lot of important issues already. Obviously, talking about the antibiotic pipeline, which is what TB Alliance does. We are a non-profit, but we function effectively as a small, medium enterprise or a pharmaceutical company. We develop new antibiotics to treat TB with a public health focus in mind. And we were started in the year 2000 from a global, a large global gathering in Cape Town, where we were sort of tasked to create a public-private partnership. And I think that's a topic we're discussing here, which is collaboration or global collaboration, as Helle rightfully pointed out. I think TB can be a case study for the antibiotic pipeline. Of course, TB represents 1/3 of the world's burden from AMR in terms of both its health impact, global losses, as well as the social and economic impact that's projected to happen from AMR in the future. So why is it a case study? Because I think the difference between some of the other AMR initiatives is that in TB, this initiative started 20 years ago in the year 2000. And in that time, there was already a recognition that without a public-private partnership and public investment, TB would not be an issue that would be solved around the world. Our success story is really around the buildup of a pipeline for antibiotic drugs for the treatment of TB. And with the resistance developing that happens, this is especially important for this discussion. So until a few years ago, until last year, actually, a diagnosis with extensively drug-resistant TB that's really resistant to all the major antibiotics we had in the pipeline, was a death sentence. The first outbreak happened in South Africa, or the first recorded outbreak happened in South Africa, where 52 of the 53 patients identified passed away. This August, we have managed to secure approval by the European Medicine Authority for a new treatment, which is not just one antibiotic, but a combination of new antibiotics that treats TB. And as you can see from this slide, the key trial that we concluded in South Africa had 109 patients with XDR-TB that were treated normally for 24 to 30 months and had a historical 35% success rates. And the success rates you see here is quite marvelous in that perspective. We're talking about over 90% success rate among the hardest to treat group of patients with AMR-TB. So this is, I think, just a testament to success, including the buildup of the pipeline of drugs behind this approval that we just had in August, which is a current program of about 23 different drugs that we have available to develop for TB. Now, that's by no means a sustainable pipeline, as Tim was explaining, but it's a lot better than what it was. In the year 2000, literally, there was no programs left in clinical development for TB. So the potential of public-private partners is important to bear in mind when we have this discussion. And more importantly, I would say that the framework that's being discussed and was indicated also by MEP Wilken in his opening address needs to have a public health focus, but one where collaborations is important and where public-private partnership is essential. So let me look at the things that we feel from our experience are essential for the development and give a little bit of flavor on practical level of what we see is needed. So first of all, we need to indicate, and everyone I think is agreeing with this, that you need alternative funding models. We particularly are interested in things like the subscription model for new antibiotics and other medicine, because that basically delinks the volume of use from the economic returns for developers. What we also need to, however, recognize is that pooled incentives, which are really quite interesting for the public health system, are not going to be the only issue. As was indicated before, we do need investors like Wellcome Trust, like the European Commission and its member states, to invest heavily in push mechanisms and grants. Unlike in COVID, which we currently see successful development in an unprecedented rapid speed, we will not spend trillions of euros on antibiotics with competing developers, products, and clinical trials. This means we have to create public funding investment strategies that reward products and developers to collaborate and find products with the highest chances of success. So we need to, as Hello has indicated, to develop strategies that keep access in mind from the start. Access is a core part of a public-private partnership like TB Alliances and GARP that was mentioned before. And we have to learn to negotiate a return on investment by governments, by the European Commission, by the European Union, by its member states, by organizations globally, to benefit the healthcare system and patients later on. So unlike in the past, many of the grants came with little or no requirements for its later on development as a public good. And I think this is where, if we are talking about significantly expanded grant investments into the antibiotic pipeline, we need to start becoming a public investor in those rather than a funder of grants. So next to the point that is made on R&D already, with significantly expanded push initiatives with a investment focus and pull incentives that delinks, we also need to think about manufacturing and suppliers, as already mentioned before. What we propose is that at least what should be considered is a public-private partnership to support manufacturing of small molecule antibiotics alongside vaccines. There is a very limited interest from companies to develop products, especially those that would have minimal use, and that's exactly what you want with antibiotics. You want to have them and use them as little as possible. As Tim was indicating, you really only want to use them when you really need them. However, that is of course against the market. Developers could then license a product, a new antibiotic, to a public-private partnership manufacturing facility that would make it available to health systems at under strict stewardship conditions. That would still create the incentive for the developer, and at the same time bring the usage into public hands or in the hands of the public health system. Finally, research needs to be better integrated into health policy. We have seen that research and healthcare are often dealt with separate organizations. In the EC, we have DG Research, we have DG Health. In pretty much every member state, this is the case. That means that health systems generally are not prepared for the introduction of new innovation. We can see now a change with COVID, where there's massive planning for the introduction and rollout of a new vaccine. And this is a situation which has to happen way more regularly. A last word on the shift from the EU to a broader focus on the full value chain. with the BARDA that was already mentioned, we do think it has to have a very ambitious mandate covering end-to-end, as was also pointed out by Helen, to cover incentive in all stages of drug development, early stage, clinical development, and manufacturing, just like the US counterpart that is actually quite successful. Thank you very much for your attention. Look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Willow, for this intervention and remembering everyone the social and economic burden of TB, which is indeed huge. The presented case study, I think, gives hope that a sustainable innovation pipeline could be achieved at systemic level with a public health focus. I also think your thoughts stressing that we have to keep access in mind during the whole process and pulling research and health policy closer to each other definitely put the innovation timeline to a different perspective. As now we are closer to the discussion part of this event, I would like just to encourage again participants to seize this opportunity to put forward the questions to Willow or previous speakers, and you can use the chat function below to do that. So that this brings us to the next speaker. So after listening to the various aspects of AMR research, it is now time to better understand the private sector perspective. I'm turning to Mark, as you represent the PM Alliance here. I'm sure there are many aspects from the previous presentations you would like to comment on. Mark, as you have the floor now, you can share your presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you already see my presentation?
We can see a complex.
No, we can see your screen, but I think you need to double click on your presentation, Mark.
Sorry, I have a problem here. Excuse me. One second, please. I'm sorry. Beforehand, it worked fine. Now it seems so I think here we go now.
Yes, I think you have just to launch in exactly. Thank you. It is visible now.
Sorry for the short delay here. So thank you very much also for the introduction and the opportunity to talk here. And a special thanks also to the MEP Special Interest Group for actually taking this topic of this very important topic of AMR so dearly and actually working hard to make a difference here. We heard now different presentations, many also from the public sector. And I think what is remarkable is that you will see also as my presentation, that I think everyone in the sector is pretty much aligned. And this you don't have so often, actually, if you think about the different stakeholders. And it shows, in my view, that the issue around AMR has been well researched in the meantime. We have a lot of different reports and very clear recommendations that exist since many years now. I think the first and landmark report on this was the AMR review from Lord Jim O'Neill. And what is now missing is a little bit the action. I think this is really one of the main comments that the private sector has. But let me quickly introduce who PM Alliance is. So we are actually the largest association unifying companies in the field of AMR. In the meantime, we have 70 members in 16 different countries, mainly focused on Europe, but also Israel. And these 70 members represent actually more than 130 programs, a lot of them still in preclinical, but also clinical development work. And obviously, we work for the interest of this most important stakeholder group in fixing the AMR pipeline. Why do I say the most important stakeholder group? As a matter of fact, SMEs to date stand for larger than 90% of all clinical development assets in AMR and 80% of all preclinical assets. So imagine you would actually lose the SMEs in this field. It's a complete disaster. And if you're interested in further work from PM Alliance, I encourage you to visit our webpage. You see different position papers. The most recent one is an urgent call for action on new reimbursement models. And we get back to this during this presentation. I don't need to talk about the urgency of AMR, a silent pandemic. We have all heard about this and reiterated this. Why is innovation key in the field? I think we also heard already some hints here. Of course, it's around novel therapies overcoming the resistance issue, but it's not only that. We also need to ensure sustainable use. We need new diagnostics for this, but we also need to work on approaches to prevent infections actually from happening. As mentioned, the global pipeline of novel AMR products is virtually exclusively in the hands of SMEs today. And unfortunately, these SMEs are all in a very unstable financial condition, as funding for AMR is extremely limited. And the usual sources for biotech sector are really not existing. So we have lost the entire private sector of funding, which is normally comprised of venture capital, private equity, etc. And we also have an extremely unhealthy M&A market in this field. So big pharma is really not that much interested in picking up any of this innovation. I know we just heard some of the ideas around public potential buyers in the public-private partnerships. I think these are interesting ideas that should be followed, but in the end, nothing will prevent us from fixing somehow the reimbursement model and finding again a sustainable way of reimbursing antibiotics. And of course, we all want to adhere to sustainable use of antibiotics, and this is the main reason why this market cannot be designed as it is today based on sales volumes. And lastly, of course, we must change this, because if you continue to develop an antibiotic today, it's nearly a guarantee for financial missuccess. And you know, shifting all the development entirely to the public sector will actually be too expensive overall, because the topic of AMR is too broad to be addressed singularly by the public sector. That's our clear opinion. So what is the problem? Again, we want to adhere to sustainable use, and what we need to actually be able to do this, we need urgently new reimbursement models and reforms. And one of the most important aspects about this is delinking the revenues from volumes sold, and at the same time respecting the socioeconomic value of working antibiotics for humanity actually. The different approaches to achieve this are since a long time actually on the table. We have proposed market entry rewards. A lot of, or the first countries I should say, not a lot unfortunately, but are working on subscription models to reimburse new antibiotics, and another possibility would be transferable exclusivity vouchers. We believe that depending on the country and region of the world, probably different blends or mixtures of these proposals might be best suited. However, we need action now, and there's really no alternative to fixing these antibiotics or this reimbursement topic. Lastly, where are the opportunities today, and what can we especially do in Europe to fix this? I want to lose a couple of words on the AMR Action Fund. I think this is the most recent initiative, and we have heard today about it already, that has been launched by the industry to support with further push funding, so money that goes into the development of antibiotics, the AMR field. And it's really a good initiative, and certainly since CARB-X, probably one of the most useful for the SMEs. However, what we need to stress and be aware of is that all the push funding that we will currently inject into this field will actually go to waste if we don't find a reimbursement reform. And the perfect example and role model of this is a company called Achaogen that went bankrupt last year, because they have received significant amounts of push funding, and yet it was not enough because the market absolutely did not work. So we have to keep this in mind. And here's the opportunity for the EU these days with the new EU pharmaceutical strategy. We believe here must be action taken, and the EU can be a global leader in this reforming of the antibiotics reimbursement and market access. And what we need is, obviously, Europe is a very fractionated market if it comes to market access. Reforms here would be ideal if the Parliament and the EU Commission can make clear guidelines moving forward for new reimbursement models that ideally all member states would adhere to. This would really be very, very helpful. And this will not only ensure access and preparedness for the EU population for the AMR pandemic, but also enable global access programs and long-term sustainability of use of antibiotics. Because right now, while we are all in favor of global access, we also have to admit, if we don't even know how to market and bring a product to the developed markets like Europe and US, because there's no reimbursement and no possibility to actually even cover the development cost of an antibiotic, how are we supposed as industry to ensure and help global access of these products? That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you to our host and our four speakers. We will now move to the Q&A session of this webinar. We have around 10 minutes left, so I will ask our speakers to give short, possibly short responses so that we can make sure to ask as many questions as possible in the time we have. And our first question is addressed to Tim. I'm sure it can be also picked up by other speakers. Tim Heller, in her presentation, highlighted the need to finance late-stage clinical research and development. And there is indeed a particular problem in financing later-stage development and in bringing promising products to marketing approval. So as a foundation, what are the barriers in funding later stages of clinical research? The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. I'll take that question and actually build on it and seeing some of the other questions because, you know, the Indian view, as Hella described, is a very important one we all need to have in mind here. But in terms of funding to support late stage R&D, as an example of what Wellcome has done is we've looked at the issues and barriers across the R&D spectrum, and we've been working together with industry in the design of the AMR Action Fund. We have been a very close participant in working groups over the past year and a bit, as industry has led that activity and leading to the launch. Wellcome is considering becoming an investor alongside industry in that. That is an important step forward, but it actually is not going to be the long-term solution, and it's certainly not going to be sufficient in its own to be transformative for this space. It is something that actually will buy us all more time while we figure out some of the more important issues. More important is how can we attract private investment into this space? So we talk about public-private partnerships. Willow described that and made a very clear case of the role of public-private partnerships. We also need to think about attracting private investment into this space. The monies can't all come from the public purse in the way that we often think about it. And that requires there to be a commercially sound proposition at the end of the day. How do we get to that commercially sound proposition? Well, I think that what Mark described is a very important thing, and that is that we have to recognize the societal benefit or the public health benefit of having these very important tools available to healthcare systems. And in order to achieve that, what we need, and it's particularly important that Europe tackle this, is to look at the objective measures for achieving that public health benefit and the societal benefit. So there needs to be significant improvements in the health economic evaluation that's undertaken, and it could be done more at a European level. And certainly there could be a best practice approach that is established at the European level that individual member states can draw on, so that there's a convergence of how member states actually pursue market access. And this could be complemented by things such as pool purchasing power through other mechanisms. But this is something that could be pursued today, to be implemented, to start delivering results in the near term. Doesn't require massive restructuring of how the European Union it seeks to work. So I think it's very important here. We have to break things down into the achievable steps as we look to move forward. So short term, yes, let's inject more money there, but we have to attract private capital, and that means fixing the business case. And there are things that we can do if we can better recognize the public health value that these important tools provide to healthcare systems. And digging deep in the details, there are things that can be done starting today. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. So it's not all about money. Are there other speakers that would like to jump on this? Hello. Yep.
Yeah. So just a number of reflections here in response to what's been put forward from the other speakers. I agree that there is a significant amount of overlap in how we see the problem and how we kind of need to see the bigger problem and not just the economic one. But I do think in listening to the different presentations that we're still quite far away in actually being in agreement on what sort of solutions we're looking at and what would be the most sustainable ones. And I think that's something that I would underline to the people that are listening in here. The point about, is this about putting everything in the public sector? I think that's the wrong way of putting it, and that's certainly not what I have been arguing, and I don't think that was what Willow was arguing either. But I think what we're calling for is to have a public sector that funds R&D with much more intent, and that is targeting its funding to overcoming significant challenges that persist and that are really kind of digging into how do we solve the specific challenges. And it's not just about the big challenges of solving a business case or business model. It's much more than that. And that's what I tried to highlight, that we have, at least 5 very big challenges we need to address. And all of those addressed together is what will eventually looking at fixing the business case for this. I want to echo the point that Tim made also on the AMR Action Fund. We certainly believe that the AMR Action Fund, with the money that it's bringing to the field, that's a positive thing, but we don't think that they can be seen as the sole solution, and certainly not as the only funder. I think we need to consider that currently they are the only funder available once they launch, obviously in January. At that point of R&D in the later stages. And what that means is that places a lot of control in the hands of, a pharmaceutical industry that hasn't been able to solve these issues for the past 30 years when it comes to access, when it comes to stewardship and all of that. I mean, if we don't have any other funders in that space, that's basically going to be up to those companies to devise the policies that will shape this space and will affect patients both in high-income countries and particularly in low-income countries. So that's really something for the public sector to be mindful of, that this is not something that can be considered done and dusted and handed over at this point. I'll end there to let others come in also.
Yeah, thank you very much, Helle, also to adding those points. And as I can see the discussion is going over, here is the next questions from Bertrand Fournier, and maybe Willow and Mark would like to elaborate as it is about access. The question reads as follows. We fully agree that market access is one of the main issues and that new economic models such as the linked model could incentivize the development of antibiotics. It happens that market access is decided at member state level and not at central level. In consequence, what can the EU do to alleviate this issue? I don't know, maybe Willow, you would like to come first?
Yeah, maybe very briefly. And because this is also a meeting organized by an MEP, one of the things I would mention is indeed this is an issue. There has to be global collaboration, not just at the EU, but also globally. For instance, reference pricing in the US, in Europe has created difficulties as it is an incentive from companies to go to higher income Western countries first that can afford higher prices, and therefore delays the introduction in countries in the EU that are at lower level. But this is not just about Europe. This has to be solved on a global level. So G7 and G20, next year is organized by Italy as well as the UK, are an excellent opportunity for the EU to get involved and ensure that there's incentives that are wider carried. No single country can solve this problem on its own. And we have to come up with solutions that are carried by a large global group of organizations. So there's a lot more to say, but we're running out of time. So let Mark comment, and then hopefully we can hear from Mr. Vulcan.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Willow. Yes, so I think obviously it is correct that this is a global problem and we need to find a global solution, and G7 and G20 are important groups to actually discuss this. However, we need to also take some smaller steps and feasible, achievable goals into mind, and I think the subscription models are extremely important, like UK is currently testing it, but also Sweden is already evaluating or implementing it for actually access to generic drugs. Why is this important? Because it is probably an illusion that we get all of a sudden the entire HDAs of Europe to speak as one voice. But we need urgent, starting points for the private sector to somehow have a chance to stay alive in this. And I refer again to the companies that actually hold currently the entire innovation. I think that, global access, and as Ella mentioned, we have several topics that need to be solved. This is absolutely right. But I see a lot of activities actually. When, for instance, we sign today CARB-X grants, when we talk to GARD-P, etc., all of these organizations ask us and work actively in collaboration with us and the industry on how to make access more achievable, faster, how to get regulatory hurdles potentially out of the way, manufacturing hurdles, etc. So a lot of these topics are really addressed. Unfortunately, the one that I see personally not being addressed sufficiently to actually get some traction again in the private sector of co-investing into the space is a pathway forward or a hope in fixing the reimbursement. That's why we push on this topic very importantly, because to date, we have actually 2 countries working on this actively and publicly known, which is Sweden and UK. And in the US, we have several attempts in front of the lawmakers, but nothing really with traction. So our point is, again, while we perfectly recognize there's more issues than just the economic one, we need to see some action on the economic one so that we are alive long enough to actually bring products forward and address adequately also the access and other issues, sustainable use issues that we still have.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm just going to read a comment we received from Sarah Gardner from the WHO. Sarah is saying that the issue is indeed not just about the economic modeling. The healthcare systems cannot fund the necessary innovation unless budgets are significantly increased. Antimicrobials are also competing against other innovations for different clinical areas. And so what we need is a broader discussion about the roles of the different public-private investors, what to invest, when, and how. Unfortunately, I think we could have spoken for at least 1 more hour. Time is running out, so I'm afraid we have to conclude this exciting discussion. I would like to thank all participants and, of course, our hosts and speakers for their time and insightful contributions. I know that MEP Falcon has to leave really soon, so I'm going to give him the floor so that he can give his closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe very briefly on as a response to Willow. Obviously, no single country can solve this alone, but I do think that as a union, we should at least make a start. Discussions on global level started years ago, and we still have not seen enough action. So we should not wait for a global response, but start, of course, with the European Union. But very briefly, as you said, we could discuss for hours longer. So I just directly move to my closing remarks, and I will start with a big thank you to all speakers today. Especially to Willow, as it is very early. So thanks for that. But as Tim perfectly pointed out, AMR is one of the key challenges, and COVID-19 showed us that infectious diseases need a global answer, and as a minimum, or better as a start, a common European one. So this is a public health issue. And Willis said correctly that research in this area needs to be better integrated into health policy. Specifically, the development side of antibiotics still needs improvement and additional support so it can be transferred into products. Therefore, alternative pricing models driven by availability rather than consumption are needed. And I hope that someone from the European Commission is here with us and is listening carefully. The right antibiotic has to be affordable and accessible for everyone, no matter where they live. As Helle pointed out as well, access to effective antibiotics has to be a focus for all of us and is an unmet cross-border need. Here we need more action. And moreover, we need to promote the prudent use of antibiotics. Too often antibiotics are over and misused. Also, the medical devices sector plays a crucial role when it comes to prevention with, for example, rapid diagnostic tools that can prevent giving out antibiotics if they are not needed. Same goes for stewardships in this area. Prevention of AMR is key, I think. And I did hear you, Mark. We as policymakers need to step up. Trust me that our interest group is doing its utmost to push and get a binding proposal on the table during this legislation for new reimbursement models from the union's market. And with this very short closing remarks, again, thank you very much to all speakers. And I hope that it was very informative for our audience. So I'm very happy, and I hope that we can continue the discussion on this very important topic.
Thank you very much, MEP Volkan, for those closing remarks, and thanks also for speakers and participants for being with us. As said at the beginning, the recordings of that meetings will be available on the MEP Interest Group website, so you can come back there and check it there. And remember to follow the MEP Interest Group activities using the hashtag MEPvsAMR. So thanks for everyone for being with us. And have a nice afternoon.